On top of a 19th century courthouse, a slender iron rod rises past the weather vane, ending in a copper ball and a cluster of fine points aimed at open sky. It carries no bell, no flag, no clock. In old photographs, nearly identical rods crown hotels, exposition halls, train depots. Look long enough at these buildings, the 1893 Chicago Fair, the grand hotels, the domed capitals, and the same ornament keeps appearing. A mast, a sphere, a crown of spikes. Then, across the 20th century, quietly and almost everywhere, they came down. That's where I want to start. Start with what the ornament actually is, because the honest answer comes first. Most of those rooftop rods are lightning conductors, an idea Benjamin Franklin worked out in the 1750s. A pointed metal tip, a run of cable, a ground stake. They quietly drain a building's charge before the sky can do it violently. The rest of the crown is easily explained too. The copper ball is a decorative finial, the spikes are bird deterrents, or ornamental cresting, the flourish of an age that dressed even its drain pipes. The mast held a flag or a weather vane. 19th century builders adorned rooftops the way tailors adorned coats, and they came down for reasons no one needs to hide. Iron rusts, copper is worth stealing. Ornamental ironwork became expensive to insure and dangerous to maintain, and modern architecture by the 1930s had fallen out of love with the whole vocabulary of finials and cresting. Fashion changed. The rods followed. That explanation is sound. I want to say that plainly, because I'm not here to pretend the ordinary answer is weak. It accounts for most of what we see, and if you accept it wholesale, you'll rarely be wrong. Buildings age, tastes shift, hardware is removed. Nothing about that requires a secret. So let me be precise about the small thing it does not fully settle. It isn't the rods themselves, it's their strange, almost liturgical consistency at one particular moment and one particular building that everyone in this story eventually circles back to. A tower on Long Island, finished in 1902, torn down in 1917. Its name was Wardenclyffe. Nikola Tesla built it. The structure was designed with help from the architect Stanford White, financed in part by J.P. Morgan, and topped with a vast mushroom-shaped dome of metal. Beneath it, a shaft reportedly sank deep into the ground. This is documented. None of it is legend. Tesla's stated purpose is documented too. He intended Wardenclyffe to transmit signals, and he claimed usable power without wires across great distances, using the Earth itself and the upper atmosphere as a medium. He spoke of the planet as a conductor and the sky as a reservoir. Grand, strange, and openly published. Here is the quiet fact that doesn't tidy up. Tesla wasn't a mystic on the fringe. He was, at that moment, one of the most celebrated engineers alive, the man whose alternating current already lit cities, and the era's finest architect and its most powerful financier lent him their names and money for this specific idea. Then the money stopped. Morgan withdrew further funding. Tesla's finances collapsed. The tower stood unfinished and idle, and in 1917 it was demolished. The standard account says to settle debts he owed, including to the hotel where he lived, scrap value against unpaid bills. Ordinary, deflating, and probably true. But sit with the shape of it. A world-famous inventor, backed by serious institutional power, builds a tower explicitly designed to draw on atmospheric electricity, and within 15 years the structure is rubble and the concept is quietly filed under beautiful failure, not disproven exactly, just abandoned, then rarely spoken of again. Now widen the frame and stay inside the same world, the same decades, the same architecture. Look at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the White City. A temporary metropolis of vast domed palaces rose in months, dazzled 27 million visitors, then was mostly demolished or lost to fire within a couple of years. That is all documented, and again ordinary on its face. The fair's buildings were deliberately temporary, built of staff, a cheap mix of plaster, cement and fibre over wood frames, never meant to last, grandeur on a deadline, designed to be struck like a stage set. Everyone involved knew it was scenery. Yet look up at the photographs of those palaces and you find them again, the masts, the spheres, the crowns of fine metal points against the sky, on structures that were never supposed to survive a winter. Enormous care lavished on rooftop ornaments for buildings scheduled to be torn down. Decoration on the disposable. It's a small oddity, but it repeats. And repetition is the whole of what I'm actually claiming to see. Not a single miracle, a pattern. The same rooftop grammar, mast, sphere, radiating points, appearing on courthouses and hotels and exposition halls across a few decades, and then, across the next few, being steadily unmade. One reading of that is nothing. Another reading is where the theory begins. The theory has a name now, though it's younger than the buildings, Tartaria. In its telling, an advanced civilization, sometimes tied to the real historical maps that once labelled Inner Asia Tartari, built these ornate structures using atmospheric or wireless energy, and that whole world was later erased, its towers rebranded as mere decoration, its purpose forgotten by design. I'll be honest with you here, because this is the point where honesty matters most. As history, Tartaria does not hold. Tartari was a vague European exonym for lands the mapmakers barely knew, not a hidden empire. The architectural styles the theory groups together were designed by named architects whose blueprints, contracts and letters survive. We know who drew the White City's palaces. We know the firms, the budgets, the construction timelines, the labour. We can walk into archives and read the correspondence. The buildings that supposedly belonged to a lost super civilization have paper trails as mundane as a shopping list. That is a serious problem for the theory, and I won't pretend otherwise. So why does the pattern still tug at me? Because the theory, stripped of its wilder claims, is really asking one narrow question I find harder to dismiss. Not who secretly built everything, but why did an entire generation of builders top their proudest structures with hardware pointed at the sky, and why was so much of it later removed? The ordinary answer, I keep reminding myself, is complete on its own. Lightning rods were genuinely necessary before modern grounding codes. Ornamental cresting was genuinely fashionable. Removal was genuinely driven by rust, theft, cost, and taste. Every individual piece has a boring, sufficient explanation. That's the strongest argument against reading anything into it. And yet, the theory's sharpest move isn't about any single rod. It's about coordination. It asks, if these towers and spires did once do something we've forgotten, who would have had to agree to forget it? And its answer is unsettling precisely because it names no one. It describes a silence that could organize itself. Consider how that would work without a conspiracy. Utility companies had every reason to favor metered, wired power over any scheme of open transmission. Insurers had reasons to want rooftop ironwork gone. Architects chasing modernism had reasons to strip ornament. Municipal budgets had reasons to defer maintenance until removal was cheaper. No one needs to meet in a room. That's the part I can't fully wave away, even as a skeptic. You don't require a villain for an idea to disappear. You only require that no powerful institution has an interest in keeping it alive, and several have an interest in letting it lapse. Convergent self-interest can bury a thing as thoroughly as any plot, quieter and with no one to blame. Apply that lens back to Wardenclyffe. Tesla's dream, whatever its real feasibility, threatened a business model in which power is generated centrally and sold by the unit. A tower that gives energy away, or claims to, is not a product, it's a liability. The theory says, notice who profits from its silence. You don't have to accept the rest to feel that. But feeling isn't evidence, and I owe you the counterweight. Tesla's wireless power scheme, examined by later engineers, faces brutal physics. Transmitting usable energy through the ground and air over long distances is wildly inefficient. Most of it dissipates. Wardenclyffe may have failed not because it was suppressed, but because it could never have worked as promised. That single sentence undoes a great deal. If the tower was simply an idea ahead of its evidence and behind its physics, then there was nothing to bury. Morgan pulled out because the returns weren't there. The structure was scrapped because it was worthless, and Tesla was broke. The pattern I'm chasing may be the residue of ambition, not concealment. I hold both of those in my hands at once, and I can't make them cancel. The physics argument is strong. The pattern of removal is real. Both can be true. It's possible the towers meant nothing and were dismantled for dull reasons, and also possible that a real half-formed idea about atmospheric energy died in the crib and was simply allowed to be forgotten. What I keep testing is the uniformity. Fashion changes unevenly. Neglect is patchy. Some cities keep their old ironwork, others strip it. If suppression were coordinated, you'd expect thoroughness. If it were mere fashion, you'd expect randomness. What we actually see sits somewhere in between, widespread enough to notice, spotty enough to explain away. That in between is where theories breed. Let me concede the most likely reading before I go further, so you know I'm not hiding it. Almost certainly, the rods were lightning conductors and flagpoles and finials. Almost certainly, they came down through the accumulated small decisions of insurers, engineers, and accountants. Almost certainly, there is no lost energy network humming beneath the ornament. Almost certainly is doing honest work in those sentences, not weasel work. I mean it as a genuine estimate, not a wink. If you asked me to bet, I'd bet on the boring answer every time. The ordinary explanation is not a cover story. It's most likely just the story. And still, the one detail I cannot fully retire is Wardenclyffe's ambition, not its success, its ambition. Because for a brief window, serious people with serious money treated draw power from the sky and send it without wires as an engineering goal, not a fantasy. That window opened, and then it closed, and it has stayed closed. Why did it stay closed? That's the question the theory really lives inside, once you strip away Tartaria's impossible empire. Not was there a hidden civilization, but why did a whole line of inquiry into atmospheric and wireless energy go quiet and stay quiet, while wired, metered, sellable power became the only future anyone built toward? There are good answers: physics, economics, the overwhelming practical success of the grid. Ideas don't need to be suppressed to lose, they can simply be beaten by better ones. The wired grid worked, scaled, and made money. Tesla's tower didn't. History rarely needs a conspiracy when it has an invoice. But notice what that concession does. It hands the whole story back to convergent interest, to the quiet, uncoordinated agreement of everyone who benefited from one future and not the other. And that is exactly the mechanism the theory pointed at from the start, only wearing sober clothes. The silence didn't need an author, it needed a market. So I'll leave the miracle claims where they belong, unproven and mostly indefensible. There was no lost super civilization. The buildings had architects. The rods had ohms and grounding stakes. I want to be the last person to tell you otherwise, and I'd ask you to distrust anyone who states it as settled fact, including some quieter version of me. What remains when all of that is stripped away is smaller and harder. A real tower, built by a real genius, backed by real power, aimed at the real sky, standing for 15 years and then gone. A recurring ornament, everywhere and then nowhere. A line of inquiry that opened once and never quite reopened. Maybe that's all coincidence and economics and rust, and I'd put my money there. This is a theory, one possible reading laid over documented facts, not a verdict, and you should weigh it exactly as lightly as it deserves. I've shown you a shape in the record. I haven't shown you what casts it. But the next time you pass an old courthouse or a grand hotel and see that slender rod still standing above the weather vane, aimed at nothing, carrying nothing, ask yourself only this, not what it is. We know what it is. Ask why so many of its neighbours are gone, and who exactly decided the sky had nothing left to offer.